Okay. Okay. Greetings, everyone. Hello. I'm Ed Kashi, and thank you all for coming. And thank Marwa and her amazing team at Cairo Photo Week, and also the American Embassy for supporting not only my visit and my talk, but Maggie Stieber and some of the other folks here. So this evening, I want to share a selection of projects that I have produced over the last 30 years, actually, around the world that reflect my evolution as a visual storyteller, transitioning from just doing stills to working with both stills and video, as well as my evolution into being what I call an advocacy journalist. And that's really the heart of what I want to talk about this evening with you. So let's get started here. And I hope we can have a nice conversation afterwards with questions. So we're going to start in Kurdistan. In 1991, I didn't know when I did my first major project for National Geographic magazine, looking at the struggle of the Kurdish people, the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own, that I was an advocacy journalist. I just knew at that point that when I learned about that fact that I just stated, that I was drawn to tell this story. And little did I know that, I would end up spending months in 8 different countries in the Middle East, as well as the Kurdish diaspora in Germany and the UK. Little did I know that I was creating work that would go on to not only be a cover story for National Geographic and a book called When the Borders Bleed, The Struggle of the Kurds, but that this work would go on to have a kind of advocacy impact and a role. I've been blown away over the years when I've gone back to Kurdistan, or I've been in Europe and I've met Kurdish people who have said to me that my book actually taught them about their own history. It's quite humbling when you're able to create work that goes beyond the media sphere and actually has an impact and creates change. And that's really at the heart of what advocacy work is all about. And that's what drives me at this point in my life and in my career is I want to work on projects, I want to work on issues where I feel that I can have an impact. And so, as I said, I was sort of an unwitting advocacy journalist back then, when what I was really trying to do was, make my name in this profession, really sort of have a career as a photojournalist and a documentarian. And also, at that stage in my life, this was by far the most difficult thing I had ever done, working in Iraq and Iran and Syria in particular, and Turkey. It was very difficult, but I also learned so much, not only about the Kurdish people and the Kurdish cause, but about my own heritage. My parents are from Baghdad, born and raised, and moved to New York City in 1942. But I grew up as an American kid in the 60s and 70s. I didn't really think about my heritage, and the Kurds brought me face to face with it for the first time at the tender age of 33, actually. And so, anyway, so this was sort of my first, not only like massive project, but where I created a body of work that went beyond just getting published in magazines. And then I decided to turn my camera on my own culture, on my own society. And when I looked about what would be one of the great themes of my lifetime, I thought aging, this issue of aging and how the industrialized world is actually growing older, and within the next decade we're going to reach, for the first time in human history, where more people are over the age of 60 than under the age of 18. And so over the next 8 years, I worked with my wife, Julie Winokur, who was then a writer, and we produced this work. We produced a book and a documentary and a website and all kinds of iterations of this work. And this was another evolutionary step that I took and we took as advocacy journalists. And ultimately, this work not only was published around the world and sort of had an impact in the media, but also I started to get invited to like geriatric conferences and nursing conferences and, something that was outside of my world of being in the kind of media art world. And it clarified for me, or it sort of opened my mind up to what it means to create stories that do more than just work in the media. And so for this project, we looked at, so America is full of subcultures. So there's a motorcycle club called Retreads. And if you're over 55 years old, you can be in it. This is in Sturgis, South Dakota. Looking at a couple in their 80s getting married in Florida. Probably one of the largest segments of American society that is active in politics is our elders. And so with it, gambling is a huge problem among our elders in America. And so I was looking at not only kind of, so we have this gift of longevity where on average we're living 20 to 30 years longer than we did, 100 years ago. And what we wanted to look at was sort of both the positive side of it, people who are in the Senior Olympics and in the Senior Pro Rodeo and motorcycle clubs, but also the greater need for caring for people. And so we did a lot of frontline reporting looking at how America, which is very good at kind of destroying tradition, but then reinventing itself, what were some of the programs that were being developed. And so, for instance, the man who's being diapered, he's in his 80s, he's a World War II veteran. This is his son who, through a program through the Veterans Administration, would come every day to take care of his dad and then leave him go back to work, knowing that a nurse from the Veterans Administration would come and care for him. This is on the Pine Ridge Native American Reservation in South Dakota, and a very, very economically challenged part of America. And we saw how it was actually great-grandparents who were caring for the new generation. This is an example of where I actually intervened. Sometimes as a journalist, as a documentarian, we have to wear multiple hats. Like I can only imagine the folks who are in Turkey and Syria now covering this horrible, the aftermath of the earthquake, how it would be so difficult to just be a documentarian where people are in such great need. Well, I came upon this woman, and we found her in this state in her home. Her son had cashed their Social Security check through a party and then left her like this. And we were so appalled at what we saw, we actually called the emergency, EMS folks, and then they came and took her away. And so this is a case where, as a journalist, we were actually intervening in someone's life and having a very direct impact. I'm not sure if it was a good or bad thing. I just know that that's what we needed to do. This is Ike. He's 100 years old. When I made this image, he was living in a single-room occupancy hotel in San Francisco. So we were looking at all the different ways within the context of an aging society, sort of, as we say, looking at the topography of aging. What does it look like? What's the impact on society? One of the fastest growing segments of the prison population in America, which I'm ashamed to say we incarcerate more people than any country in the world, are our elders. And it raises questions. I think it's on average, it costs about $60,000 a year to care for an imprisoned person in America. Is that the right way to spend money on an 80-year-old who theoretically can't hurt anyone anymore? Probably one of the most beautiful stories that we encountered in our almost 8 years of working on this was in West Virginia. We wanted to look at rural hospice care. I hope you all know what hospice care is. So this is when someone is basically at a point in their lives where it's just a matter of time until they die. So there's no medical intervention. It's a matter of just finding, a way to comfort them and keep them safe as they pass on. And this was the moment where Maxine, who's 90 years old, that's her husband in the white shirt. They had been married for 70 years. This is the moment where she passed. This is probably the most amazing personal experiences that I have ever had doing this work. And then what it did was it made us realize that when, this is Herbie, my father-in-law, that when he reached a point where he was 82 and he couldn't live anymore alone, he was showing signs of dementia and Parkinson's disease, we moved from across country from San Francisco to New Jersey, where he lived, to take care of him. And he lived the last 2 years of his life with us. So this was a case for the first time in my life where actually I was turning the camera on my own family and on myself. This is my wife and our daughter. This is in 2004 to 2006 where we did this work. We were challenged. We didn't know how to take care of an elderly person. You know, we did our best, I hope, but it was an amazing experience for us to care for him, and I believe probably was also a great experience for our kids. Now, I know in most other cultures and societies in the world, this is not an unusual thing to do, to keep your elder in the home and to take care of them. But, you know, in America, I'm sure there are many, many families who do it, but a lot of the way America is structured, and I do believe this is a result of capitalism, although we don't need to get into that, but is it in some ways it sort of frays communities, it frays families. And so anyway, it was really interesting what we learned in doing this work. And I like to say that the work we did on aging as journalists, well, my wife didn't need this training. She's an amazing human. But for me, it made me a better human being. By being a journalist and seeing for almost 8 years what it was like for an elderly person who was estranged from their family and was left alone, as opposed to elderly people we met whose families gathered around them and took care of them. It was a real life lesson. So then my next project was looking at the impact of 50 years of oil and gas exploitation in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta. Nigeria is one of the 10th largest producers of oil and gas in the world, and yet it is the area where this resource comes from is incredibly poor. Most of the people who live in the Niger Delta live on less than $2 a day. Many of the communities have no running water, no electricity, no paved roads, very poor schooling, no health care. You know, and when I first went there, I was appalled by what I saw, and I was inspired to continue to work for a few years to develop this body of work, and ultimately published a book, Curse of the Black Gold. And this was yet another step for me in becoming an advocacy journalist. And this was, in some ways, one of the biggest steps I made, because I was so pissed off by what I saw, this economic inequity, this abusive, this corruption that left the people where this natural resource comes from. It's their patrimony, and yet they were getting nothing out of it. You know, living in communities adjacent to the oil works. You know, living in an area, the Niger Delta is the third largest wetlands in the world, and yet it is horribly polluted. You know, the fisheries, which people relied on to a large degree, are decimated. Agriculture, which also was a main way that people fed themselves and made a living, has also been seriously damaged. So I set about trying to create this sort of large portrait or mosaic, if you like, of this large area in Nigeria, but also get into sort of the culture and the politics and the environmental degradation. One beautiful thing that came of this image, so this is the largest abattoir or slaughterhouse. It's an outdoor facility in the Niger Delta, and this young boy, Paulinus, he's 14 at the time, when this image appeared in National Geographic, a woman in America was so inspired, she actually worked through her local church to find him and then started to pay for him to go to school. So this is an example of when I talk about advocacy journalism, and I'll get into this more as we go along, but you can have an impact on an individual's lives, but you can also, in some cases, be a part of changes in the laws of our countries. And again, it's not because of my work, but it's about working kind of hand in glove with activists, in some cases even with the government, corporations, whoever they may be, to make this change. I also started to get involved with the rebels because after years of frustration in the Niger Delta, where the people stood up and tried to have dialogue with the government and with the oil companies, once they got nowhere, then they picked up arms and they started to take expat oil workers hostage and blow up. At one point, they were blocking 250,000 barrels of oil a day from leaving Nigeria by blowing up oil facilities and taking workers hostage. The conditions are just abhorrent of how the people there were treated. And this is something that, sadly I see over and over again around the world, how workers are treated. So ultimately then Oxfam, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, I think it's a UK-based NGO, massive NGO. They contacted me and commissioned me to make a series of these posters that went to 10 universities around the United States to raise awareness about an impending bill in the US Congress that would force extractive industries, oil, mining, and gas, to be transparent with how much money they invested in the world, in their operations, and how much profit they made. And ultimately, the bill passed the Congress. Now, again, it did not pass because of my work, but it's this idea, again, looking at this issue, this idea of advocacy work, where we as storytellers can create work that other people can use to make change. And that, at this point, is really the driving force behind my life, behind my work. This is yet another example. So in 2010, I was contacted by the Vietnam Reporting Project. It was an NGO out of San Francisco, and they were gathering about 15 journalists, writers, broadcast journalists, photographers, filmmakers, to tell stories about Agent Orange. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what Agent Orange is, but it's a chemical defoliant that the U.S. Army sprayed throughout Vietnam to basically destroy the jungles and destroy the hiding places of the Viet Cong. And so I decided to go to Da Nang, which was one of the major hotspots for Agent Orange. The terrible aspect of Agent Orange is that the active ingredient is dioxin, and it is something that is passed down genetically. So that means not only are thousands and thousands of Vietnamese children today, 40 years later, being born with birth defects and health issues, but also probably the great-grandchildren of American veteran soldiers who are also exposed to this chemical. I'm going to play just so I was talking about at the beginning how I've also evolved from being just a still photographer to working also in film, and so I decided to do this project both in stills as well as to make a video. And ultimately, this work, well, all the work of the 15 or so journalists that were, they were commissioned, it was funded by the Ford Foundation, a major U.S. philanthropic organization. Ultimately, this work was shown to the U.S. Congress, and it convinced them to allocate millions of dollars to the Vietnamese government to clean up the last remaining Agent Orange hotspots. So again, this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that it is possible to be a part of change as a storyteller. So let's see if this will go. This is the trailer for the film.
We are outside the Da Nang airport in Vietnam, and this pond is believed to be contaminated by the Agent Orange. Ask the people whether they know the pond is contaminated or not, and they say no, they didn't know about that.
Cái chỗ đó là nhờ tôi ở chung quanh đó này, là bàn đây qua tới đó là coi như mới nam nhờ là nam ngược, chứ đâu phải là mình tôi ra.
rồi cái không biết sau này rồi không có nữa rồi không biết ở lo cho hết còn phần.
All right, keep it to the end. Actually, give it to me now. Let me hit the right key there. All right. Okay, so this is an example of a very small story. So we were working. This was about 2002. So again, I don't know if you guys know this, but back then in the United States, there were something like 47 million people without health insurance in America, which again, richest country in the world. It's absurd. It's just absurd. Another impact of capitalism, negative impact of capitalism. Anyway, and so we were commissioned by a foundation to do a series of, to do a book and a series of stories of actually 47 people who did not have health insurance. So we met this woman, Sheila Wessenberg. This is in Dallas, Texas, and she had breast cancer, and she had a double mastectomy. And her husband, who worked for a tech firm with a six-figure, $100,000 salary, lost his job after she got sick. And when we met them, she was begging on the streets of Dallas. And so also her son was autistic, so it was quite a dramatic story, and so ultimately the New York Times Magazine published this story, and within a month of its publication, she received $50,000 in donations. And so again, this is another example of how, you can do work that can have such direct, profound impact on an individual, or in this case, a family. So we're going all over the place here, so bear with me. All right, we're going to make a pivot to Europe. And just so I hope you understand what I'm trying to do here, especially for the folks who are photographers who might, or not just photographers, filmmakers, storytellers, writers, what have you. If you have a desire to make change or be a part of change or to have an impact in your work, I'm trying to outline many of the different ways that I've had the great privilege and opportunity to do that, to hopefully inspire you or give you ideas of how you might do that in your own work. So I think it was 2013, I was commissioned by Open Society Foundations. That's a New York-based NGO, or a huge foundation. And we were looking at, they wanted to do something on police profiling in Europe. So we went to the UK, the Netherlands, and France, and we interviewed and photographed, I think, 36 different people. And the idea was to create short videos and these stills that would be used to raise awareness about, the impact on these individuals in these societies who are, basically people of color. In the case of Europe, in the United States, it's mostly African Americans and Latinos, but in Europe, you would be people from the Maghreb, Egyptians, Moroccans, Algerians, of course, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then, from the Arab world. And so the way I decided to approach it was to use sort of an LED, like a spotlight, put them in public situations where either they have been harassed by the police or would be, and in a sense almost shine a spotlight on them. This is very different than 95% of the work I do, which is all reportage and documentary. In this case, it was a really more of a sort of designed approach. And so this is in Leicester in the UK. This man is from Jamaica. He's a policeman, but when he's in civilian clothes, he'd be harassed by the police. This young man is from Mali, and he was telling us how, and he wouldn't reveal who it was, but we realized afterwards it was his father, but he had such shame that when he would be out in public with his father, he would have to watch his father be, searched and thrown on the ground and harassed. This is Paul Mortimer. He was a Premier League footballer in the UK. This is in Leeds. And when he wasn't in his uniform, he would be harassed by the police. And then when the police would find out who he was, they would ask for his autograph, and he would tell them to fuck off. Anyway, this is in France. So anyway, the idea with this was, again, to sort of not just humanize these people, but sort of allow them to explain what it feels like to be harassed by the police when you're innocent. And it's just because of the color of your skin that you are harassed. So ultimately, the films we used were actually used by the Dutch police as sensitivity training for their officer corps. Another example of how you can have impact with your work. All right, we're coming closer to home here now, or this region. So in 2013, I had done, up until that point, I had been to Syria maybe 8 or 9 times. I actually, in 2008, spent 2 hours with Bashar al-Assad photographing him. I never could have imagined then what would happen to Syria, which is an incredible country, incredible place. Anyway, and so once the civil war started and this just the ravaging of this country was happening, I decided I wanted to do a project about the impact on Syrian youth. I don't know what the number is now, but then it was something like 5 million. There were 5 million refugees from Syria. More than half of them were under the age of 18. And so this is an example of where I did a bit of what I call a paradigm shift. I didn't go to Time magazine. I went to the International Medical Corps, which is a huge American NGO that deals with healthcare and frontline intervention, sort of like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Anyway, and so I knew they were working on this issue of the mental health of Syrian youth. And so I got them to commission me to go to Iraq and Jordan to document a few of the youth. This was in a camp in Jordan. And again, I did a series of pictures, but I also made a film. And ultimately, the film was published by Time magazine. So in this case, it was an NGO that financed the work, but I used the media, or a major media organization, to project the work out into the world. This is in northern Iraq, the Domiz camp. Then there was something like 50,000 people in this camp, probably mostly Kurdish because of the region that it was in. And I'd like to share just a brief, the trailer for the film here. Oh, that wasn't good. All right. Technical craziness.
بلشت الثورة يعني وصار معنا شفنا يعني كل شيء صار قدامنا وكل شيء يعني المظاهرات تطلع قدامنا الاعتقالات يجي مداهمات على بيتنا وأصوات القصف اللي ما كانت تتوقف أبداً.
بدك انت تتأقلمي مع جو جديد، حياة جديدة، يعني بفضل الله يعني امك وابوكي معك، يعني هي اكبر نعمة. فانت المفروض ما تضايقي. لا يا بابا، احيانا الواقع ما بيتواجه، صعب نواجهه. فالانسان من هيك رب العالمين خلقه انه يتعرض لضغوط نفسية، يوم ينبسط، يوم يزعل. وهلا ايام الحزن فرضت حالها، لازم نتعايش هون ولازم نتعايش هون.
Okay, Now for something completely different. Thank you for going on this winding journey with me here. 2013 was a big year, apparently. So in 2013, we started a project in the city of Newark, New Jersey. It's the largest city in the state of New Jersey. It's also what we call like a global city. It's not huge. It's maybe 400,000 people. But so what we did is we devised this project with a professor at Rutgers University in Newark, and myself and Julie, again, my wife, that was called Newest Americans. And the idea was to tell local stories of global significance around the issue of immigration. Immigration is, I believe, one of the biggest issues that the United States faces. And, you know, the cliche is we are a country of immigrants, but it's actually so true. And anyway, so what we've done over the last, 10 years now, is we created a sort of what we call a collaboratory of storytellers. And we also worked with 7 Photo, the agency that I'm in. And so a lot of the work was done by other photographers than myself who are in the agency. We've even worked with people who are outside of 7. And it's not just, it's photo essays, it's film, it's, we did a music video by an Ecuadorian immigrant. Anyway, the idea was to create this sort of multi-platform storytelling project around the issue of immigration. So I want to share a short, like we call a sizzle reel that looks at the project, and then we'll take it from there. All right. Lightroom does not like video.
We're in the shadows of New York. The thing with the Newark scene is there's so much good talent, it just needs to be recognized.
I'm an immigrant, I'm an artist, an organizer, and an instigator.
A lot of their parents don't have cars, they don't have phones, they don't have all these basic things.
What's your point? I am my homeland, and my homeland is me. My love for you is fire in my heart. When am I gonna see you free?
Every time I've said I'm going to stop, I can't.
Whenever somebody uses the word illegal, they're actively dehumanizing a person.
Well, Newark was, let's say Newark was a place of entry. If you were coming from someplace else, you're going to stop in Newark first.
For most of my childhood, my father was all over the world, traveling, speaking, writing poetry, doing plays. Their grandson is now the mayor of the city.
My family is from Pakistan,
Egypt,
Puerto Rico,
India, Nepal.
I'm the first one in the family to be born in America.
So I want to share just a couple of pieces specifically that we did. So this is something that I did. So this is something I did, again, a departure for me, where we wanted to do something on the issue of immigrant detention. So again, for those of you who don't know, so in the United States, if you arrive and you seek asylum, technically you're supposed to be given a court date and all that, but what often happens is that you are put in a detention center, in a prison basically. And what is absolutely disgusting about it is that 90% of these facilities are privately run. What does that mean? There's a profit motive to incarcerating people. And so Julie and I were, are appalled by this. So we decided to work through an organization that deals with immigrants, and we were able to find a handful of folks who were willing to sit for me for a portrait and then do interviews, audio interviews. And this was for a big exhibition where we made like life-size canvas prints, and then with a QR code, and then when you called that, you would hear their voice telling you their story. So these are just a few of the portraits I did. And the way I decided to do the portraits, and again, this is a real departure where I had the person who does my sort of darkroom work for me basically kind of mask out the background. So, well, what I was going for was the feeling of that they're kind of neither here nor there. This woman's from Uzbekistan. This is from India. This is from Nigeria. He's gay and had to flee Nigeria because of persecution. This man's from Djibouti, and he's he's in political asylum, so he didn't want his identity shown. Okay, another piece I did, and I'm super proud of this one, Hijabi World. On the Rutgers University campus, there are literally over 100 languages spoken. It is that diverse. And there's a very large Muslim population. And the professor, Tim Raphael, that we created this project with, he had worked with a number of young Muslim women who had done like a sort of a theater piece about what it's like to wear the hijab in America. And so I decided it would be great to do a short film where I sort of brought that to life. So I want to share this with you. And this film actually ended up going viral. It was picked up by the New York Times, National Geographic, and was now seen by millions of people. Hopefully this will play.
There was a video that went viral all over social media where women wore hijab for a day. And suddenly their experiences overshadowed ours. And people are always saying Muslim women are not speaking up or they're oppressed. Well, it's because we never have a platform to speak. And whenever we do speak, oh, we gotta start over? I'm Egyptian and this is my sister.
I was born in Pakistan and raised in America.
Born and raised in the United States. I'm originally from Palestine.
My family's from America, from West Africa. I was born in Togo.
My mom is Irish. My dad is Egyptian and Turkish.
I was born in Indonesia, raised in Indonesia.
I originally started wearing the hijab when I was in 9th grade.
I started wearing hijab when I was in the 8th grade.
When I first started wearing it, I was wearing it mainly because my friends were wearing it.
My mom did it, my sister did it, but I also felt a spiritual high, and I felt like it was my time.
And no, I'm not deprived or oppressed. No one forces me to wear hijab.
I'm telling you, this was my decision. My dad didn't force me. My parents did not force me.
Once I started learning about the feminist movement during my junior year in high school, that's when I actually started wearing hijab, like with my heart.
It's become a part of my skin. It's become a part of who I am, and without it, I'm not me.
Being Muslim and being black and being a woman, it is a lot. It's a lot of minorities put into like one, and it is a lot to hold on my shoulders, because some days I wake up feeling so much stress, and sometimes you itch in your own skin.
There's nothing that really limits me just because I wear hijab.
A lot of runners tend to be naked while they're running. Not naked, like sports bras, short shorts. And I remember my coach was like, "You still want to wear your shorts over that?" And I was like, yeah, I would like to still cover my butt, you know. I'm not going to change my personal comfort and my religious rules for a sport.
It's forced me to develop my character. It's forced me to develop my personality, to really understand and know myself better.
The most ridiculous thing I've been asked is like, "Oh, what's the color of your hair?" And I usually respond normally. I tell them the color of my hair. Or like, "Do you shower with that on?" And I'm like, "Yeah, totally. I shower with this on."
Somebody will come up to me like, "Wait, do you speak English?" English? And I'm like, "Yeah, I speak English."
"Does your dad know what your hair looks like?" "Yes, my dad knows what my hair looks like." Or like, "What about when you get married? Can your husband see your hair?" "Yes, my husband can see my hair. I'm not married." Oh, another one. "Do you ever get hot?" "Yes, guys, I do get hot. Like, it is hot out. I'm human. My face is melting currently. It's okay."
Given the rise in Islamophobia, I find myself being a lot more aware of what I'm doing, when I'm doing it. I'm very conscious of standing as far away from train platforms as possible. You know, you kind of feel the need to smile extra, to assure people, hey, I'm not a terrorist.
I rock my Islam, I rock my blackness, I rock my femininity with all the pride that I can because I love it. I love who I am. And if someone doesn't love the person that I'm representing, I wasn't born to please you. I was born to please God.
It would be a lot safer, a lot easier, a lot more convenient if I just took off my hijab. But I feel like once you do that, you remove yourself from the picture and you accept the fact or the idea that Muslim women don't belong in America or Muslim women who wear hijab aren't part of the American story, when in fact we are.
There's nothing really I don't like about it, honestly, except for when I have bad hijab days like today.
I don't like when people touch my hijab. Like, that's it, just don't touch it. Don't touch it, look at it, don't touch it.
All right. And just, I decided, the way I decided to make that film was using like a Steadicam, if you like, or a gimbal, and, miking them, because I love, they're just so, like, strong and beautiful, and just, I wanted them to be able to, like, be walking and presenting themselves, with strength. So that was my sort of aesthetic decision on how to film that. All right. So I think this might be the last thing. So thank you for bearing with me here. So, okay, so this is a project I've been working on for a decade now. And this really takes the idea of advocacy work to a level I've never achieved, where, so this is around the issue of chronic kidney disease. This is a global problem. I first went to Nicaragua in 2013. Really was a big year for me, 2013. Anyway, and to do this small commission about this unknown disease that was affecting sugarcane workers. And once I got there, literally every single day in this one community called Chichigalpa, there was a funeral for a sugarcane worker every single day. I could not believe what I was experiencing, what I was seeing. So I decided to go back and make that my next personal project. And this is a decade later. I'm still working. I was just in Nicaragua actually last month doing a new film about this. And also the issue has transitioned, but I'll talk about that. So, so I've now worked in 7 countries on this project: Nicaragua, El Salvador, India, Sri Lanka, Peru, and then most recently, Nepal and Qatar. And this is a disease that affects a certain part of the kidney that is not related to obesity or high blood pressure or diabetes, the main cause of kidney disease. And it really is an affliction of the rural working poor, and increasingly of labor outside in general, not just outside actually. And it's preventable. Tens of thousands of people have died from this disease. It causes such tremendous impact on the families and on the communities, often who are very poor. And this is an example, this is in Nicaragua, of what is like an at-home dialysis. And generally, this is a death sentence. Within 6 to 12 months, the person will die. This is this man was a commander in the Sandinista army, and now he lay dying with his one of his daughters taking care of him. This is a sugarcane worker. He died 3 days later. This is his son rubbing his feet. I mean, it was really hard to see a community devastated. In this one community, 69% of the men have died or gotten sick from this disease. I am sure that there are workers in Egypt who have this disease. It is so underreported and undiagnosed. And then in Nicaragua, what happened was so many of the men had died that then now the women are going out in the fields to work. This is in Sri Lanka. So in terms of my visual approach to this project, from the beginning I decided I was going to do sort of a four different ways to approach it. One were environmental portraits with testimony. The other were reportage documentary images. and then short documentary films. I think this past month will be the 5th one we've made, and then of course social media to get the word out. And my first film that I made, called Under Cain, on this issue about the situation in Nicaragua, when it came out, thankfully National Geographic published it, and when it came out, the sugar mill changed their labor policies. They realized they could not get away with hiding this disease because they were blaming the workers. They're alcoholics, they abuse painkillers, all this stuff. They were not taking responsibility for the fact that especially sugarcane work is backbreaking. It really is an inhuman form of work. And also, as this is also a climate change story, because as the climate is getting hotter, particularly around the equatorial band of the globe, it is becoming almost impossible to work outside. So one of the beautiful things that's happened, and actually that's what I went back last month to work on, is that as the labor practices have changed, the small NGO that I work with, this activist that I've worked with who really introduced me to this, has come up with this simple but brilliant solution: rest, water, and shade. Because one of the main causes of disease is repeated dehydration. So when you're working in, incredibly hot climates that are humid, and you're working for, 4 to 6 hours without a break, and you're not hydrating enough, you break down your kidneys. So it's a really simple solution that does not require the corporations and the companies to go bankrupt to take care of their workers. So again, going back to the theme here of advocacy work, when you can find an issue that you can tell a story about that not only raises awareness, but can lead to actually solutions. So now this is like 5 o'clock in the morning. This is in Nicaragua. Now the buses, before they take the workers out in the sugarcane fields, they load them up with water. They now bring tents out into the fields. They work for an hour. They have a break. An hour and a break. And you know what's happened? The disease has gone down and productivity has gone up. So it's a win-win for everyone. Also, the scientists have been using, they're monitoring the heart rate, blood pressure. They're taking urine and blood samples of the workers because they're trying to create sort of global protocols for studying this disease so that, it can be an international effort to figure out solutions on how to mitigate it. And it's so rare that we get, as journalists, we get to see things improve. And so it's wonderful when that happens. Okay, so then this summer, the newest sort of iteration of this project, I went to Nepal and then Qatar to look at the issue of not just Nepalese workers, probably some Egyptians as well have gone, but especially people from India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Kenya, Nepal have went to Doha over the last decade to build all those World Cup facilities. And in Nepal alone, something like 6,500 workers have died from this disease. And so we went to investigate this, and I was fortunate enough to get Time Magazine to back me on this. I went with a colleague, Tom LaFay, a brilliant young American filmmaker, and Aaron Baker, who is Time Magazine's senior climate correspondent. And anyway, so these are some images from Nepal. We wanted to go to where sort of the source of where these workers come from. And again, this is a dialysis clinic. So this young man, Surendra, had gone and worked in Qatar for years and then contracted this disease, and now he's on dialysis for the rest of his life. He's only 32 years old. This is the widow of a Nepalese man who had worked in Qatar on the World Cup stadiums and died there. And then this is Doha. When we were there, it was like, I know you guys don't work in Fahrenheit, but it was 120 degrees and 80% humidity. It was absurd. It's absurd to even just be there, let alone to work in this environment. And so they've had to institute, labor practices to protect the workers. So there are these large fans around all the work sites. They had to stop working between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., the hottest part of the day. And these are the workers. This is like 9:30 in the morning. They've been working for hours, and now they're lining up to go to be taken back to their worker hostels. And we weren't even dealing with the abuse of these workers in Doha. We were really looking specifically at the impact of heat stress on workers. And in terms of this project, this decade-long project I've been working on, that I see as the shift of moving away from specifically looking at kidney disease and now looking at the impact of heat stress on workers. And this was the main stadium for the World Cup. And then we also produced a film that Time published, and I think this is just like a 1-minute trailer for it. Let's see here. Nope, that's not the one.
There was a video.
Oh, okay. Hold on, folks. This is the last thing, so.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
But hosting an event of this size requires a lot of preparation. New stadiums.
Temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius with almost staggering humidity.
Human rights groups have highlighted the deaths of migrant workers during the construction of the state-of-the-art.
एउटा किसानीको घरमा स्थिति हुँदैन अनि त्यही नभएको कारणले पनि अब देश जाने भन्ने बाध्यता भयो अनि अब गर्मीको टाइममा त धेरै गर्मी हुन्छ नाकबाट खुन जाने हुन्छ इत्यादि मान्छेहरू कोही ढले हुन्छ
We find lots of patients returning with kidney failure to our country.
For sure, the World Cup has accelerated the labor reforms in Qatar.
People are going there, and dead bodies coming every day.
Something has to be done.
Thank you. Any questions? You guys all hungry? Yeah.
There's a question here.
Hi. First of all, thank you, and you're marvelous, and I truly appreciate the effort you're putting to cause change and everything. Out of curiosity, I don't know if that would make me sound dumb or anything, but is it okay that you're doing that? Like, aren't you worried about, like, for example, like what's happening in Doha and everything? Is that okay? Like, Doha's not against you for that and stuff? Or do you have to talk to them that you're doing that, or do you just go?
Right. Well, I don't know if this is working, but anyway, it was difficult. We actually had to delay our trip. Originally, they messed around with us, and then once we got there, it was super tight. Like there were a lot. We could only photograph certain things in certain places. So it's just. But I'm used to working in places like that where.
Apparently.
Yeah. Well, I gather that's. But anyway, so I'm used to that, and then you just try to do the best you can. I think because we were there for Time magazine, in some ways it makes it not easier, but it makes it possible. In other ways, it might also create red flags for the authorities. Yes, and also, I mean, in general, I get tired of like blaming. Blame doesn't get us anywhere. What I want are solutions, you know. And so what was also really good to see, and I hope this becomes reality, is that the Qataris and then the ILO, International Labor Organization, got involved, and they actually improved some of the labor conditions. But what we learned was that if you were a construction worker not working on a World Cup site, you are not benefiting from those changes. So there's still so many workers who are abused and are getting sick and are having accidents and, you know, working in conditions that are just not okay. But there was a lot that I believe we learned about, because this is something that we're facing, I mean, all over the world. As the earth gets hotter, as our climate gets hotter, there are just jobs that are going to be impossible for humans to do. So I think there are some good things that came out of Qatar in terms of, you know, potential improvements for worker safety.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very touching and very impactful, and to look at how you can turn from advocacy to action and then really see an impact on the ground. It's so inspiring, but would be great to think back throughout your journey and share some of the key lessons that you maybe want to share with us in terms of how you choose some of those projects, what inspires you, and what are some tips for really the up-and-coming photographers that you think they should really, or journalists, that they should keep in mind to have a purpose in what they do and really can make a difference at the end?
Thank you. A lot. Okay, yeah. So, what inspired, no, there was like 3 questions there. But I think, you know, what inspires me and therefore what I choose to work on has changed over time. You know, that, you know, there was a time where I actually, you know, thought I could bridge the chasm between Islam and the West. Well, I didn't do a very good job of that. But anyway, but, you know, like I realize now that I need to look at issues. First of all, to answer your question, you need to figure out what you care about. That's the fundamental question you need to answer for yourself. What do you care about? What are you interested in? Because that's where you'll get the energy to pursue it and to, you know, get back up when you get slapped down, you know, which invariably will happen. And so for me, that's changed, where I think in some ways, like, I see the things I can work on now where I feel I can have an impact are related to immigration and related to health. You know, like there was a time where I thought, you know, I could deal through conflict or things like that, but I just think that it's just, those are so beyond my ability to make any impact, you know. So for someone who's getting started, again, what do you care about? That'll be your superpower. That'll be the source to push you forward. And then you need to figure out, how do you want to tell that story? You know, what's the best way to tell that story? You know, when I began my career 40 plus years ago, it was still photography. Well, I realized that especially with the internet and the way social media and everything has evolved with our media landscape, that video is really powerful. You know, and then you can actually have the voice, you know, you hear Surendra tell his story. I'm not telling his story. And so to me, that's also key, is to figure out how do you want to tell that story. So I hope I answered those questions, but yeah.
Hi. So my question is, you've said that when you're working with the project about aging, it took you 6 years to document the project. So how can you conclude, if you're working with something like aging that's not like an event, or you're covering a story that's happening right now, how can you conclude that you have all the things, all the stories that you can feel comfortably sharing, like you've shared the whole narrative of these people that you're trying to get their story out there?
Yeah, so like, when do you know you're finished, basically? It's a great question, and in the case of the aging project, I think we had enough. We had seen enough death and enough elderly folks sort of, you know, deteriorating and all that it was like we needed to move on. But I would say that it's a tricky one. I mean, because a lot of these projects you could do forever. there is no end, you know, but there's a point where you need to say, right, I'm either done or I have enough. You know, I like to put it this way, that we, not so much with video, because video is very different, but with stills, we're creating a puzzle, but the pieces are unformed. And as we move forward in creating the work and creating the images, then we start to see the puzzle pieces take shape. And then we start to figure out how they all fit together. So we have that mosaic or that puzzle in the end make sense. So it's different for every project. You know, you could work, I've worked on a photo essay for a week or 2 weeks, and I have enough. And then I've worked for a decade on something, and I can see there's still more to do. And then I think, just to finish on that question, it also, like, I know colleagues where they're so connected to the issue that it's almost like a lifelong pursuit, and in a way it never ends. Even if they publish a book or make a film or whatever, they keep on working on it. Yeah.
So I noticed that you probably mentioned the names of almost everyone in your photographs, which probably means you have some sort of a human connection to them. So my question is, how do you approach the subjects of your stories? How do you build a relationship with them before starting to work? Do you sometimes have, especially in vulnerable situations or in conservative societies where they're scared if their story gets out, do you sometimes decide with them that it's better to not actually, if they think it's going to change their life or have a negative repercussion in their life, to not do this because it would be the more conscientious thing to do? Do you sometimes have to convince other people that of your work and what you do, and that it's okay to take their photo or have them included in your work?
Okay, so there's a few questions in there, but I think to me, the main question you're talking about is informed consent, which is a term that is now used, at least in our profession, but I don't know the names of everybody. I faked you out very well, though, didn't I? No, but no, but it is something that is important to me, you know, to make some human connection with people. But the tricky or the weird thing about, especially photography, is like I can spend 5 minutes with someone and make a picture that you think like I've known them forever, you know, and I can spend years with someone and never make a good picture, you know. So it's a very mercurial, very weird kind of dance, if you like. But in general, I pride myself, or my goal is to achieve what I call candid intimacy, where as a viewer you feel so intimate and close to the subjects, but there's no trace of me or my camera. So that's achieved again in various ways. You know, sometimes it's never possible because of either cultural, you know, or political dynamics that make it impossible. So that's that. Now, in terms of informed consent, which is a relatively new term, and it's a tough one, you know? It's a tough one. Like, there are some people where, you know, so for instance, like the two main women in the hijabi film, they obviously gave our consent to do, you know, to create a film on their project, but then after it came out, they got upset. You know, they felt like they lost authorship. So that's a slightly different thing than what you're asking. But I mean, it's very hard to control these things, you know. But I think to the heart of your question, you need to, it's not enough just to get someone to sign a release or to agree to be documented. It's on us to sort of make the decision. I think, as you rightly point out, like, they might say yes, the work gets published, and then they get into trouble. Either because of, it could be social, cultural things in their community, it could be political, security things within the context of the government situation, depending where you are. So it's on us to, as best as we can, to know those things and to understand them. So that even if they give consent, we might have to intervene and go, you know what, we should either obscure your identity, or maybe we shouldn't even tell your story because it's too risky. But it's an imperfect science. It's, you just never know. I mean, it's, you know, you can try as much as possible to cause no harm, but sometimes we do. Yeah. it's one of the thorniest, difficult issues in doing this kind of work.
I wanted to ask, how did you get here, and how did you realize storytelling is what you wanted to do?
You mean like how did I get to Cairo? Sorry, smart ass. No. So how did I become a photographer? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Sorry? Sorry, again.
This type of photography specifically, like storytelling.
Okay, so as I said, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in America, in New York, at a time where, you know, all these progressive movements were blooming. You know, the women's rights, civil rights, environmentalism, all these things were blossoming and exploding in front of me, and I was young. And I just, whether I was wired that way or it's just what I was attracted to, that was like the breast milk that I grew up on. Was political awareness and a kind of, not activism, but political awareness, and also just that I care. So I originally wanted to be a writer. I realized I wasn't a very good writer when I went to university, and then I discovered photography, fell in love with it, and that love affair continues as strong as ever, even as troubling as it may be at times. But anyway, and so then I feel like photojournalism, documentary photography kind of enabled me to blend like what I cared about, the fact that I wanted to be a storyteller, that I wanted to engage with the world, and I wanted to have some meaning to my life. Like all those elements kind of came together, like synthesized in this. So that's how I got here. I hope that answers your question.
I want to ask about, how do you approach making images? So do you plan ahead for a certain picture? You talked about taking candid and environmental portraits in your work, but for instance, can you take us, like for instance, the photo of the girls in the refugee tent? Can you walk us through how did you take that photo? So did you direct them to stand you had something in mind when you entered that tent, for instance, right, and to get through your message of the story?
So in general, I try to intervene as little as possible, other than for portraits with the subjects, which I like to call kind of collaborators. Like that specific case, it was really complicated because I think she was 14 years old, and I could not be alone with her. So it became very difficult in that I had very short windows of time with her where either, a relative had to be present, especially if we were like in the tent or that sort of thing. So I was just trying to get whatever I could whenever I had the opportunity to be with her and to be able to make pictures. Because one of the tricky or challenging things with access, especially when you're dealing with different cultures, different religions and all that, is to first try to understand and be sensitive to what I can do, what I can't do, all that. And then within that, once I have access, to figure out how to navigate it and not upset people and not cross those red lines, where I think I'm being charming or I think I'm doing something okay, and I have completely upset someone or completely upset the family. I mean, it's horrifying when that happens. So it's a tricky process, to try to get the access and then preserve it, hold on to it, so I can do my work. But in general, it's really about, doing your research, doing your homework, understanding as best you can what are the issues, what's the context in which this is taking place, how should I behave, what I can do, what I can't do, and then try to work within those parameters. And, I would have to say that working in the Middle East is probably the most challenging place in part of the world. And I've had so much experience here over the last 30 years. It's just really tough. But it's amazing when it works. But it's really, really tough because there are a lot of government security issues, and then there's also the cultural human element where, you know, there are so many things that in other parts of the world you can just do and it's like easy, and then here it's like, you know, really tough. But it's worth it. How is that? Did I just piss everyone off here? No?
Okay. Hello.
I was saying that to folks earlier today in my workshop that after working a lot in the Middle East, it's amazing when you go to other parts of the world, you're like, oh, it's so much easier. You know, it really is. It's so much easier. Should I just shut up now? Sorry. Well, no, because it's also frustrating, you know, because it's so amazing here, and the culture and the history and the people, and it's so amazing, and it's like you can't, you know, there's so many barriers. But when you get past them, it's amazing. Like Nigeria actually is probably equally difficult of all the, you know, non-conflict zone places I've worked in. Just it's so difficult there. People don't want to be photographed. The government doesn't want you. The oil companies don't want you. The security forces, like no, even the villagers often don't want a person with a camera. But when you can break through that, it's amazing. It's amazing when you can make those human connections. I have to tell you a story. You all tell me to shut up here, but I have to tell you a story. Early on, when I was working on the Kurdish project, and I was like a kid. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'd never been to this part of the world. And I was in southeastern Turkey in a really remote Kurdish village, you know, very traditional. All the women are in abayas and, you know, covered. And all of a sudden, this like woman grabs my hand and brings me into this room and closes the door. And all of a sudden, I'm in a room with like 15 women of different ages. If it happened now, I would understand. Then I was just like, and then she pulls out like a snuff box and starts handing me snuff. And my head was just spinning like, what is going on here? You know, my homework told me I'm not supposed to be alone with women in this situation. And then they're bringing me in, they're like giggling. And anyway, so that never happened again. No. Well, no, then of course the men came in to get the hell out of there. No. But it was a moment of where I realized, you know, I'm going to put my foot in it if I continue. So, but all I can, whatever. It's just these are the guardrails. These are the things that can be so frustrating, and you know, to deal with, you know. But so it's you know, this is where doing this work you get to learn so much. You know, that I've come to understand better and appreciate, you know, why some of these cultural mores exist. Whether I agree with them or not is one thing, but in a way you can find some of the beauty or the logic or the purpose of it, and I think that's part of doing this work. You know, is that okay.
Okay, can I ask a question? Hi. So it's really nice having you here, and I want to ask you about your point of view on photojournalism. Like you probably involved now with a lot of projects, and you did a lot of projects. So do you think the future of photojournalism, is it something is fading away now? Is it going to be like a new wave of transmedia, interactive media, and new approaches in photojournalism that people are going to use more, or newspaper will use more? Because I think it's what we do is even if we do photojournalism, it's something subjective at the end, not objective. This is one question, and also the second question is, do you have this inner fight when you're traveling to do an assignment about representation, and you ask yourself, why you doing this assignment in this community, then maybe different than where are you from? Yeah.
Okay, so the first question, there are already so many new approaches to doing this work that myself and many of my colleagues utilize, you know, whether it's everything from a smartphone to video to traditional still photography. But I would say one of the biggest changes that I see is a move to doing more conceptual documentary work. You know, where you are manipulating, you are becoming, you're more interpretive, more subjective, if you like. You know, so I feel already all of that creativity has blossomed and is blossoming. The issue is, how do you get it out into the world? And also, how do you get paid to do it? How do you get compensated so you can actually make a living at it? So that's an issue that is not resolved, that part. And it's always been a tough profession. It's never been easy, but now it's way more complicated, and I believe much harder, because the traditional supporters of photojournalism, newspapers and magazines, even in, you know, the rich United States and Western Europe, to a large degree, have shrunk in the number of publications, and then their budgets have shrunk, even National Geographic. You know, when I did my first project for them in 1991 on the Kurds, I had a 26-week contract. I would say the largest contract you would get with them now is maybe 5 to 8 weeks, which is still a lot of time, but just as an example of how things have changed. So, you know, I think the editorial world, and not so much broadcast television and filmmaking, but the sort of print world, if you like, continues to struggle. And that has a direct impact on what the support we can get to create this kind of work, which is why I would hope one of the takeaways from this presentation is that you need to look to other sources of support to create the work, and then you use the media to disseminate it. So increasingly, you can't expect to make your living by getting your work placed in publications, except for a rare, like, handful of people who are constantly getting assignments. So that's one important element to take into consideration, is how can you find alternative sources of funding? NGOs, foundations, nonprofits, maybe in some cases corporations, probably not too many, probably never government, but anyway, you know, there are other ways to find grants, of course. Grants would be another way. So then, but the point is you have to figure out how to create the work. But then once you create the work, there are still wonderful outlets to disseminate it. So that was the first question. The second one was?
Second question about, do you have this inner fights of representation, like being insider or outsider while covering a specific assignment? Do you think about it? What is your point of view about it?
Yeah, the whole insider-outsider conversation, which has really sprouted in the last 5 to 10 years, because when I began, we didn't talk about that. And it's good that we're talking about it. Well, it's frankly changed. Like, there are issues I deeply care about, like racial justice, and I don't feel now I have the right to tell that, which is kind of messed up, but it is what it is, you know? I'm very interested in women's issues. I understand that I'm probably not the person to tell that in the same way, but I believe that it would be to our detriment if we only allowed the insider view, because there's such value in the outsider view, as long as it's done in a proper way. So my hope as we move forward is that while we're now in this wonderful period where there's more opportunity for inside, and if you like, insider views, and this is something that at like 7 at my agency, we are totally, we are probably the majority of our effort is put towards this, which is teaching and mentoring majority world photographers, and so that they can tell the stories of their own people, their own places. But I would hate to think like I can't come to Egypt ever again to tell a story. I can't go to Nigeria again to ever tell a story. It'd be terrible. So we'll see where it all plays out, you know. But yeah, it's a very interesting moment now where there's huge change taking place. For the most part, like way overdue, and for positive. But anyway, it's very complicated now.
I have a question. So, do you find it hard to, when you're like talking with someone, like to do someone who has like a very, especially when the humanitarian causes, if someone is going through a lot, and you find it hard to separate yourself from being the narrator of the story instead of being a human and reacting to the story?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Are you saying, do I get emotionally
Yes, exactly.
affected?
Yeah.
Tremendously affected. Yeah, I'm a very sensitive and emotional person. I've cried a lot through my work and all that. It's just,
because I'm the same way. If
yeah.
someone's telling me a very emotional story, I would find myself reacting. It would be harder for me to grab my camera and start documenting what they're saying, because I wouldn't feel like I'm giving them a safe space to truly express themselves. I would be like as if I'm exploiting their pain or suffering.
Right.
Yeah.
See, but if you believe in what you're doing, then you're not exploiting them. And if you're working in a proper way with understanding and sensitivity, you're not exploiting them. You know, or I will put it this way, you can't do this work if one thinks that way. You know, but I totally understand why one can feel and think that way. You know, and I will say that the cumulative impact on me personally, now having done this for over 40 years, is that sometimes it's hard. It's become a lot harder to, like as an example, in 2008, when my father-in-law, he died, and then a few months later, I was working on a story about Arab Christians in the Middle East, and I found myself in a room in Damascus speaking to Iraqi refugees who were telling me the most horrific stories of how, you know, like 10 of their relatives were killed and all this stuff. And all I could think about was, I can't wait to go back to my hotel room. And I realized, because I had just gone through a personal traumatic experience myself with the passing of my father-in-law, and I was basically emotionally tapped out. And that was a moment where it was like, whoa, that's a warning sign that I need to take care of myself, because it's absolutely horrible to not exploit people, but to get yourself into a position where they are telling you these things that are so traumatic and so difficult, and you're thinking, I can't wait to get out of here. Whereas up until that point, I would have been like sobbing and holding them or whatever was appropriate, you know what I mean? So, and I think this is another conversation that the sort of new generations, I'm so happy, have brought up, which is that this idea of self-care. You know, that to do this properly, you also need to take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for everything. My question is, I mean, you have been through so many experiences, unique experiences, and my question is, if you had, for example, the chance to have an unlimited budget to cover just one thing, just one topic, just something maybe you care about more than anything, because you said earlier that we need to start by asking ourselves what we care the most, I mean, what we care about the most to start to be a photographer or journalist photographer. What would be this topic or whatever? Thanks.
I hate questions like this. No. This is like, who's my favorite child? I don't know. I mean, you know, the irony of everything is just, I probably want to just do something in the United States now, because I'm so troubled by what's going on in the United States. And all the breadth of experience I've had around the world has made me appreciate what we have in the United States. It's so precious and so special. I mean, the United States is a laboratory for humanity, because it's made up of people from everywhere. And that's what makes it so great. But we have these dynamics going on now that are really scary and really troubling. So I would say, to answer your question, it would be trying to figure out, how can I tell the story of what is going on in the United States now, and probably through the eyes of immigrants, because I'm a first-generation American, you know, technically, so I do have the right to tell that story. Nobody can take that away from me. And so, yeah, that would probably be it. I think it's also because, like a few years ago, I was in South Sudan working, and all of a sudden there was like a a security problem where like we needed like UN troops to come in to separate us from these angry youth, this mob. And I like sat down on the curb and I thought, what the hell am I doing here? This is not my conflict. You know, it's not that I don't care, but it's like, it was one of these moments where it's like, what are you doing, man? You know, like, you're not going to change anything. This is not your conflict. And so those kinds of experiences, to some degree, are happening more and more for me. And so what it's doing is making me kind of realize that, in a way, not only America, but America is probably the place I need to turn my focus to right now. Kind of like I did with the Aging Project. You know, that after working at that point for years abroad, I realized I needed to look at my own country and my own culture and try to figure some things out. So,
thanks.
Thank you. Up there? Or? One more question.
Just one thing to everyone who's here. We have the networking event from 7 till 9 في الهنجر, and Ed will be there, Abby, Maggie, everyone. So if you still have more questions, the networking event would be a great place. So one last question.
This is a message for you, Ed, in front of everyone. I would like to thank you so much for making it so easy to have you here in Cairo.
Thank you.
You're such a low maintenance person and very humble considering your status.
Talk to my wife. I don't know if she'd agree with that.
I'm sure she does. And I want to thank you again for just making it so fast and smooth and just come here to give it back to the community in Egypt. And it means a lot, not just to us, but I'm sure to everyone who is attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.